Clara James, a quiet waitress in a struggling town, lives a life marked by invisible burdens and small kindnesses, guided by her grandfather's teachings on quiet honor. One rainy evening, a soaked, trembling veteran, Eli Turner, enters her diner, asking only for hot water and a crust of bread. Moved by a memory of her own grandfather, Clara defies the diner's strict rules and her demanding boss, Becker, by serving Eli a full, warm meal. This profound act of compassion, done without expectation, immediately cost Clara her job, leaving her jobless and deeply uncertain about her future. What will become of Clara, and will anyone recognize her quiet sacrifice? If Clara's story of quiet courage and dignity touched your heart, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing our channel. We are dedicated to telling true-hearted stories about everyday heroes who remind us what kindness truly means, especially when no one is watching. Your support helps us inspire others to act. I told you we don't serve beggars here. The sound of the plate shattering on the floor rang out sharp and final, cutting through the stale hum of the diner. Steaming food splattered across the worn-out tiles like some kind of protest. Clara didn't move, didn't flinch. Her body instinctively stepped forward, positioning itself between the frail old man and the shame that burned in the air, as if her thin apron, soaked at the hem, could shield him from the humiliation that now clung to him like a second skin. Outside, rain hammered the windows in relentless sheets, blurring the world beyond. Inside, the few customers who remained lowered their eyes, pretending they hadn't seen anything, hadn't heard the crash or the cruel words. They clutched their mugs a little tighter, their silence more cowardly than kind. Clara reached into her apron pocket without hesitation. "Then take it out of my tips," she said, voice low but firm. But that wasn't enough to change anything. "You're fired," the manager snapped, his voice as bitter as the burned coffee he brewed. "Get out." The next morning, just as the gray clouds finally cracked open and the first rays of sunlight spilled across the cracked sidewalk, 200 soldiers, each one in full uniform, stood in perfect silence outside that same diner. They weren't there for pancakes or coffee. They were there for her. Clara James had never been the kind of woman people noticed, and she'd made peace with that a long time ago. At 32, she had grown used to existing in the quiet spaces between other people's lives. The silence behind the clink of a coffee cup, the nod of recognition never returned, the thank you left unsaid. In a place like Ridgefield, Kentucky, where the old factory had shut its doors years ago, and the paint on every storefront seemed to peel a little more each season, blending in wasn't a decision. It was a way to survive. She wore her brown diner apron like it was a piece of armor. Her ponytail was always pulled back just tight enough to hold the day in place. Most mornings, Clara unlocked Billy's diner before the sky turned pink. Most nights, she locked it up again long after the last customer shuffled home, too tired to say goodnight. Nobody ever asked her why she took so many shifts. No one asked much of her at all. But Clara had her reasons. Every one of them lived in a tiny, dim apartment with a cracked kitchen window, a one-eyed tabby cat named Smokey, and a shoebox tucked beneath the bed, heavy with war, metals, and dust. Her grandfather, Henry James, had raised her there. A Korean War veteran with a crooked spine, a sharp tongue, and a heart tender enough to make your chest ache. He stepped in when Clara's parents vanished into a haze of their own poor decisions. He raised her on a diet of discipline, quiet pride, and the kind of integrity that didn't need an audience. Do the right thing, even when no one's watching. "Especially then, Clara," he used to say, puffing thoughtfully on his battered old pipe. "Honor isn't loud, it's quiet, like sweeping the porch before company comes, even if they never show up." When he passed away 3 years ago, the world lost one of the few people who actually knew how to listen. Clara hadn't cried much at the funeral, not because the grief wasn't there, it was, but because she knew what he would have wanted. Stand tall, Clara, even when you feel small. He used to whisper that when she was a child, her chin trembling as she tied her shoes too tight for courage. She had taken that strength and buried it deep, like a seed she didn't know how to water. She worked early, she worked late, she fed Smokey, paid rent on time, kept her head down, or at least she had until last month. That's when her roommate, out of work and out of excuses, had vanished overnight, left behind an overdue utility bill. half of a lease unpaid, and a landlord with a voice like gravel and no trace of compassion. Clara didn't panic. She packed up what she could carry, loaded Smokey into a cardboard box with air holes, and moved into a rented room above an auto garage. The place barely passed for livable. One electrical outlet sparked like it wanted to start a fight every time she used it. The bathroom faucet screamed like a banshee. Her savings were down to $64.38 and sinking fast. Still, she got up at 5 a.m. Still walked to the diner in the rain, her shoes squelching with every step. Still offered warm smiles to customers who tipped with nickels and dimes. Still snuck Smokey a spoonful of tuna from the backroom stash whenever no one was watching. People in Ridgefield often said that Clara James was a quiet girl, but what they really meant was she didn't ask for much. She didn't complain when someone spilled hot coffee on her shoes, didn't wince when the cook barked at her through the grease-clouded air, didn't argue when her paycheck came up short and the manager shrugged and told her to be grateful for the work. But what no one realized was that Clara saw everything. She noticed which regulars looked lonelier after they finished their meal. She noticed when the new dishwasher showed up with fresh bruises that he didn't have the week before. She could never fully explain why, but Clara always noticed them. The ones who slipped in out of the rain, asking for nothing more than a glass of water, never quite meeting her gaze. They moved like ghosts, quiet, careful not to disturb the world around them. Her life had become a patchwork of unnoticed kindnesses and silent burdens, stitched together by habit and heart. She carried all of it without ever voicing complaint. Most nights, long after the diner had emptied and the lights dimmed low, she'd sit alone at the counter, one hand curled tightly around her grandfather's worn dog tags, the other resting on Smokey, her one-eyed tabby curled in her lap. In the hush of those hours, she'd whisper, "We're okay. We're still okay." But truthfully, she wasn't. Not really. She was tired, not just in the way that sank into your bones after a long shift, but in the way that lived inside the soul. The kind of weariness that came from years of pretending things were fine, from swallowing down every slight and injustice, from watching the world pass her by like a train she could never quite board. She didn't ask for miracles, didn't yearn for grand salvation. She only hoped that the leaky roof would hold through one more storm. And yet, on one particularly gray Tuesday evening, with the rain slicing sideways through the streets and the diner wrapped in the low murmur of conversation and clinking utensils, something happened, something small but unshakable. The door creaked open, a gust of wind announcing the arrival of a stranger. Every head instinctively turned toward the entrance before quickly retreating into coffee cups and phones. A man stood there, soaked through, the rain dripping off his frame in steady streams. His coat had once been a proud military green, but now it hung in shredded tatters, heavy with water and time. A faded U.S. Army insignia clung weakly to one sleeve, threads barely holding it in place. His beard was gray and uneven, unkempt, and his left leg dragged behind him slightly, wrapped in old gauze that looked like it hadn't been changed in days. He peeled off a thin, spring-knit cap with shaking hands, fingers rough with calluses, knuckles thick with old scars. He held a small paper bag to his chest, so gently it could have been made of glass. Clara was behind the counter, wiping away a stubborn smear of ketchup from a laminated menu. She didn't flinch when she saw him. She didn't stare. Instead, she noticed how he hesitated, standing there like he was waiting not for a seat, but for permission to simply exist in the room. The other customers turned away, their interest now conveniently buried in phones and half-finished conversations. An older waitress, the one who worked the earlier shift, had once muttered something Clara never forgot. People like that don't want help, they want attention. But Clara had always disagreed. People like that, she thought, were just trying to move unseen, to take up as little space as possible in a world that already made them feel like too much. The man shuffled toward the farthest booth in the corner. He didn't sit down. He just stood beside it, one hand resting on the backrest, like he wasn't sure his legs could bear the weight of lowering himself. Clara tucked the towel over her shoulder and stepped out from behind the counter, her apron already damp from hours of work. She approached with quiet steps, careful not to startle him. "Evening," she said softly, her voice warm, not pitying. "Can I get you something warm?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed locked on the floor, as if looking her in the eye might cost him something he couldn't afford. But when he finally lifted his gaze, Clara saw it clearly, the sharp glint of pain tempered with pride, both fighting for space behind tired, hollowed eyes. "Just a cup of hot water, ma'am," he said after a long pause. "And maybe, if you've got a crust of bread that's headed for the trash." His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the effort of asking. The humility of it hit Clara like a punch to the chest. The words weren't unfamiliar. Her grandfather had once told her a story about the Korean War, about a night in Busan in 1952 when a stranger gave him soup and bread without asking for a name or a reason. And now here she was, decades later, staring at a man who could have stepped right out of that story. She gave him a small nod. "I'll see what I can do." In the kitchen, a returned order sat cooling under the heat lamp, chicken and dumplings, untouched. Without hesitation, she plated it carefully, added an extra slice of buttered bread, and poured a fresh cup of black coffee. She placed it all on a tray with a small cloth napkin folded neatly on the side, then walked back out like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "This was just sent back," she said, setting the tray gently on the table in front of him. "Still hot." The man looked up, stunned. I can't pay." Clara shook her head with a soft smile. "It's already paid for," she said, "and the coffee's on me." He stared at the tray as if unsure whether to accept the kindness or flee from it. Slowly, with fingers that trembled slightly, he reached for the mug, wrapping his hands around it like it was the first warmth he had felt in days. "You remind me of my wife," he murmured after a moment. "She used to do things like this. Said everyone deserves warmth, especially those who've lived it through too much cold." Clara blinked hard, her throat thickening as she fought the tears that threatened to rise. Somewhere across the room, the murmur of the diner continued. Normal, indifferent. But something had shifted. Not in the world outside, in her. The moment the owner spotted them, his gaze hardened and his mouth twisted, already forming the words that would strike harder than the storm pounding the windows. But Clara didn't care. Not then. Not about rules. Not about what it would cost her. All that mattered was the man seated in front of her, weathered, worn, and invisible to a world that had moved on without him. A man who had once served a country that now walked past him like he was a shadow on the sidewalk. He ate slowly, as if each bite required the strength of a soldier on the battlefield. His fork trembled in his hand like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Every chew looked like it hurt, as if this was the first real meal he had had in days. Clara watched him closely, the way he sat upright despite the pain etched into his leg, the way he said nothing of his hardship. No complaints, no begging, no bitterness, just quiet, exhausted dignity. When he finished, he looked up at her. His eyes shimmered, not just with gratitude, but with something deeper. A flicker of recognition, of being seen. His voice came out cracked and low, like something fragile carried on the wind. "You just saved a soul tonight, miss. Might have been broken, but not forgotten." From inside his coat, he pulled a worn, rusted dog tag. The chain was dull, fraying at the edges, barely held together. He pressed it into her palm, closing her fingers around it with care. "Name's Eli Turner," he said. "If I don't make it through this winter, I want someone to know I existed." And then, just like that, he was gone. He stood and stepped into the storm, his figure swallowed by the swirling gray mist, like he had never been there at all. Clara remained where she was, the tag still resting in her hand, somehow warm despite the chill in the room. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea what tomorrow would look like. Rent was still overdue. Smokey still needed his can of tuna. The world outside hadn't changed, but she had. Something inside her had shifted, quietly, deeply. She had done something that mattered, maybe only to one person, maybe only for one night, but it mattered. Then the front door slammed open behind her, cutting through the moment like shattered glass. Clara didn't even turn around before the voice struck her, sharp, loud, and heavy with disgust. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Wayne Becker, the diner's owner. He stood in the doorway to the kitchen, his broad shoulders almost blocking the light behind him. His eyes darted to the empty seat where Eli had been, then locked on the empty plate left behind. The air still carried the faint warmth of the meal, as if trying to shield her. Clara lifted her chin, her voice steady but quiet. The dog tag was already tucked safely in her apron pocket. "He was a veteran, sir," she said. "He only asked for hot water and a crust of bread. I gave him food that was about to be thrown away." Wayne's voice rose, louder now, slicing through the soft murmur of the diner. A few customers turned to look, then quickly turned away. "This ain't a damn charity, Clara. How many times do I have to tell you? If folks see us handing out meals to every street rat, they'll think this place is a soup kitchen." A couple in the corner froze. The woman stirred her coffee slowly, deliberately. No one made eye contact. No one said a word. "I paid for the coffee," Clara said. "Take it out of my tips." Wayne slammed his palm against the counter with a crack like a gunshot. "I said no," he barked. "You just made me look soft in front of customers. You don't get to decide how I run this place." And then the final blow came. "You're fired, right now. Pack your things and get out." His arm shot out, his finger aimed straight at the door like a weapon. In that moment, the diner felt colder, not because of the rain still falling outside, but because of what was missing inside. Kindness, support, human decency. Not a single person said a word in her defense. No one even looked at her. Clara's hands shook as she untied her apron. She wasn't shocked, not really. Hurt, yes. Humiliated, absolutely. But surprised? No. What stung more than Wayne's shouting was the silence that followed. The kind of silence that wraps itself around you like chains. From the corner, a woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, "That's what happens when you bring trouble inside." Someone else cleared their throat, shifted in their seat, and buried their face in the menu, pretending none of it mattered. No one stood up. No one said she did the right thing. No one thanked her. Clara walked out into the storm. Rain poured relentlessly from the sky. Her canvas shoes were soaked before she even hit the sidewalk. Her hair clung to her forehead in wet strands. She held her bag tightly, spine straight as ever, just like her grandfather had taught her. Outside, under the narrow awning, she stood still, heart pounding in her chest. She didn't cry, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't afford to miss a sound right now. She needed to stay alert. Rain hammered the street, and then a noise, a soft rustle. From the alley beside the diner, a figure emerged, limping heavily, his coat soaked through. Eli Turner had come back. His breath came shallow, but the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. It was still there, that quiet, stubborn flame. "I saw what happened," he said, voice ragged but steady. "I shouldn't have let you pay the price for me." Clara shook her head, eyes shining. "You didn't do anything wrong." His hand went into his coat once more. This time he pressed something small and cold into her palm, his dog tag. "You just saved a broken soul, child," he rasped, voice hoarse with something more than age or rain. "You reminded me I wasn't invisible." Before she could say a word, he turned and disappeared into the downpour, the outline of his figure swallowed again by the gray curtain of water. That night, Clara sat alone in her cramped room. Smokey, her one-eyed tabby, was curled tightly against her hip. Her wet clothes hung from the back of a chair, dripping quietly onto the floor. The only light in the room came from a flickering street lamp outside, its glow seeping through the bent blinds in faint yellow lines. She stared down at the cracked screen of her phone and refreshed her bank app. $40 left. 12 hours of work. Rent was due in 10 days. She had no job now, no insurance, no safety net, but she did have something else. Courage. And somehow, in a world that had just slammed a door in her face, that courage felt like its own kind of wealth. She picked up the dog tag again, letting the cold metal rest in her fingers. The engraving had worn thin over the years, but the name was still clear. Turner, Eli, serial number F472. The rest was faded, nearly erased by time. She traced the letters slowly, wondering where he had served, what he had sacrificed, and why this country and this town could forget someone like him so easily. The next morning, everything shifted again. Clara didn't even realize a teenager had been recording until the video surfaced online. Shaky and grainy, it had clearly been shot from across the diner, through a rain-specked window, perhaps. It showed Clara standing with quiet, unwavering resolve as Wayne, the diner's owner, jabbed a finger toward the door, shouting something cruel. His voice was harsh, his tone unmistakable. By noon, the clip had spread like wildfire, but not in the what Clara had hoped. The comments were vicious. Rules are rules. She should have asked permission first. Bet this isn't the first time she's given away food. Wouldn't be surprised if she was stealing. Her former coworkers started to distance themselves, some unfriending her outright. One sent her a message, sharp and smug. Always trying to be the hero. How's that working out now? That same day by phone, Clara applied to 3 other diners. Not one called her back. At one place, the manager looked at her name, hesitated, and said gently, "We can't risk the attention, honey. Nothing personal." At another, she wasn't even allowed to finish filling out the application. The woman at the counter slid the half-completed form back and nodded toward the exit. By sundown, Clara was wandering through Ridgefield's downtown streets, soaked, chilled to the bone, and weary. The dog tag weighed heavily in her coat pocket, as if Eli's story had taken up residence beside her heart. She passed by a bus shelter. There, beneath a sagging sheet of tattered plastic, lay Eli Turner, curled up against the cold, one arm folded over his chest, the other wrapped around that same old paper bag. Clara knelt beside him quietly. She placed a small, newspaper-wrapped package beside him, a half sandwich, all she had left to give. "Thank you for remembering me," she whispered. Then she rose and walked away, unaware that a black military vehicle had stopped at the intersection behind her. Inside sat a man in uniform, watching her retreating figure with intent. He picked up his phone and made a call. The rain ceased just before dawn. It left behind a town steeped in stillness, its streets washed clean and glistening. Puddles shimmered like broken glass, reflecting the first gold of sunrise as it broke through the low, hanging clouds. Ridgefield's downtown was still asleep. Storefronts stood silent. Traffic lights blinked yellow into the hushed air, thick with the scent of wet concrete, and something else. Expectation. At precisely 6:45 a.m., the rumble began. It wasn't the growl of engines or the clatter of hurried footsteps. It was presence. One after another, sleek black SUVs turned into Main Street, forming a solemn procession. They moved slowly, silently, and came to a halt in front of Billy's diner. The first to step out was a tall man in a crisp army dress uniform, the chest lined with medals, the cut of his jacket sharp as steel. His posture was rigid, as though he still bore the weight of an invisible battlefield. He walked to the front of the diner and stood still. And behind him, like a ceremonial tide, they followed. From the vehicles in the shadowed alleys nearby, soldiers emerged in waves, rows upon rows of them. Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force, each dressed in immaculate service uniforms, each forming a silent line along the sidewalk outside the diner. They stretched down the block, standing shoulder to shoulder, their expressions solemn, their presence unshakable. No orders were needed, no shouts or whistles. Cars slowed to a crawl. Pedestrians stopped mid-stride. Something sacred was happening. In Ridgefield, wounded and ordinary, held its breath. The town froze. Shopkeepers stood motionless behind their windows, peeking through the glass as if afraid to blink. In a place where life moved in a quiet, predictable rhythm, this moment cut through the stillness like a lightning bolt. Inside the diner, Wayne Becker had just finished refilling the napkin dispensers when the door's bell gave a sharp jingle. He looked up and nearly let the glass slip from his hand. A man in uniform stood at the entrance, tall and rigid, his eyes focused, an expression unreadable. Every line of his face was carved from control and purpose. "I'd like to speak to the owner," he said firmly. Wayne stepped forward, the color draining from his face. I'm the owner." The murmurs outside had turned into a low hum, a crowd beginning to swell on the sidewalk, drawn by whispers, curiosity, and camera phones held aloft. Inside, the tension wrapped around the air like a storm waiting to break. The officer removed his cap. "My name is Colonel Matthew Turner. I'm the son of Eli Turner." His words cracked the silence like thunder rolling across a dry plain. Wayne's mouth moved, but nothing came out. He looked as if he'd swallowed his voice. Colonel Turner didn't waver. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that filled the entire diner. "The man you humiliated here yesterday, he's the reason I'm alive." The diner stilled even further. The sizzling from the kitchen had gone quiet. Even the clinking of utensils halted, as though the building itself was listening. In 2007, Turner went on, during my third tour in Iraq, our convoy was ambushed. My transport vehicle was hit. 12 of us were trapped. Your so-called beggar carried me for 3 miles, under enemy fire, with shrapnel in his own leg. He refused treatment until every single one of us was safe. He reached into his coat and pulled out a laminated citation, crisp and clear despite the years. The Silver Star. This is his. Wayne's eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for someone to speak up on his behalf, for any kind of defense, but no one moved. The silence pressed in. Turner's voice broke slightly. He wouldn't accept help, not for years. After my mother died, his PTSD worsened. He just disappeared. We looked for him, months of searching, and now he stepped closer to the counter. We find him here, fed and sheltered, not by the system, not by this town, but by a waitress, one you fired. Outside, the crowd buzzed with murmurs. Phones captured every word, hashtags forming as fast as disbelief could turn to outrage. Michael Rutherford earned medals most soldiers only dream of, Turner continued, now more composed, his voice finding a steady rhythm. But he once told me, medals don't feed the hungry. So he pawned this. He held up the Silver Star. Pawned it to buy food for a homeless family. There was a pause, long and heavy. And that waitress who stood up for him yesterday, Turner added, voice softening but never losing its edge. She reminded him of the country he thought he'd lost. Right then, a young corporal stepped through the door, holding a compact black case. Inside it, gleaming softly, was the very medal Eli had given up. Turner turned toward the corporal and said, "Bring her here." Clara didn't understand what was happening when she heard the knock on her rented room's door, just above the garage. She opened it to find a flushed local reporter, breathless, with a camera crew behind her. "They're asking for you," the woman said urgently. "The soldiers, the entire block is shut down. Colonel Turner, you need to come. Now, Shutto." Clara blinked. Was this part of a dream? But as she stepped out, reality hit. Dozens of eyes on her, the sea of uniforms, the way the world seemed to hush. When she approached the diner, the line of soldiers parted for her, wordlessly making way. Then, in perfect unison, every single one of them raised their right hands in salute. 200 soldiers saluting her. Clara stopped. Her throat closed up, her breath caught. She couldn't speak. Not that anyone expected her to. Colonel Turner stepped forward and opened the black case. Inside gleamed the Silver Star. "My father wanted you to have this." Clara trembled. She shook her head. "I can't. It's not mine." Turner gently placed the medal into her palm. "It is now." What followed happened fast. The diner closed its doors the very next day. Suppliers stopped deliveries. Staff walked out. Veterans groups picketed the front steps, and within weeks, Wayne Becker had vanished without a trace. But Clara didn't boast. She didn't post online or give interviews. She didn't ride the wave of attention. Instead, she simply returned to doing what she had always done best, serving with quiet dignity. Only this time, she wasn't alone. A nonprofit for veterans offered her a full-time job managing a new community kitchen. Many of the soldiers she'd seen that day returned to volunteer. The line outside the kitchen stretched longer every week, but the warmth inside grew even stronger. In the corner of her modest office sat a simple wooden box. Inside it, folded with reverence, was an American flag, the Silver Star, and a single tarnished dog tag she never let out of her pocket. It didn't happen all at once. Justice never does. It moves slowly, quietly, like sunlight creeping across a windowsill at dawn. Steady, patient, unstoppable. Where Clara James once poured coffee and listened to weary travelers' stories, the diner now sat in silence, its windows dark, its booths empty. The neon sign that once promised open 24 hours had long since lost its glow, and a sun-faded for lease notice fluttered loosely behind the glass like a forgotten promise. For years, the place had welcomed everyone, truckers, locals, tourists passing through, until that morning, the morning the soldiers came. After that day, the doors never opened again. But not all lights in Ridgefield dimmed. Across town, In a warehouse that had once held broken vending machines and forgotten parts, something new had come alive. The place now buzzed with life well into the night. You could hear laughter echoing down the halls and catch the warm scent of chili cornbread and fresh coffee drifting into the street. At the center of it all stood Clara. The Ridgefield Community Kitchen, run by a nonprofit founded by veterans, had offered Clara the role of manager less than a week after the incident. She hadn't applied. She hadn't asked. Attention was never something she craved. But people like Colonel Matthew Turner had made sure her name was known, not for glory but as a quiet reminder to the country of what true bravery looks like. On paper, Clara ran the kitchen, but in truth it felt more like she had become part of something sacred. A family born not of blood, but of shared purpose. Veterans chopped vegetables beside single mothers. Teen volunteers served soup alongside retired nurses. And Smokey, Clara's one-eyed tabby, now considered the unofficial guardian of the kitchen, lounged in the window like a battle-worn commander with a heart softened by peace. But the moment that marked everything happened 7 days after that unforgettable salute. It was just past 4 p.m., the last pots being scrubbed clean, the kitchen humming in that soft way places do when the work is winding down. That's when the door creaked open, and a small boy stepped inside. He couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. Sandy hair, sneakers too big for his feet, and a look of determination that didn't quite fit his age. In one hand, he held a dollar bill, folded carefully into thirds. In the other, a cookie wrapped neatly in wax paper tied with a bit of string. He walked straight to the counter and looked up at Clara with a seriousness that stilled the room. "I saw you in the video," he said plainly. "My grandpa was a soldier too. He used to help people, so I wanted to help someone too." He placed both the cookie and the dollar on the counter. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, her hands resting on her thighs as she tried to steady the ache rising on her throat. "Can I use this to help someone else?" he asked quietly. Clara couldn't find her voice. Not right away. So instead, she pressed her hand over her heart, just as 200 soldiers had done days earlier, and gave him a small, steady nod. No speeches, no spotlight. Just a single act of kindness set into motion, one that would ripple forward. Eli Turner, the man whose quiet suffering had once gone unnoticed, the veteran whose story had ignited change, now had a place to stay. A room at the nearby VA housing unit. He received regular care, and word had spread that his son visited often. Younger soldiers sometimes came to sit with him, to listen not only to tales from foreign wars, but also to the battles fought silently here at home. Battles no less brave, no less costly. Clara visited him when she could. They rarely said much. They didn't have to. She still kept his old dog tag, still guarded the silver star he'd given her, resting inside a simple box beside her bed. Some nights she'd run her fingers over its edges, whispering the words her grandfather had once told her. Honor isn't something loud. It's quiet. Time, as it always does, moved on. Headlines changed. The video drifted into the feed of yesterday's outrage, scrolling further and further from the public eye. But for those who saw it, truly saw it, the memory held. Not because Clara took a stand, but because she stood up when it would have been easier not to. Because she gave, expecting nothing in return. Because in a world quick to forget its quiet heroes, she reminded us all what dignity really looks like when no one's clapping. In a country racing forward at a pace most of us can barely keep up with, it's easy to overlook the quiet moments. Those small, uncelebrated flickers where real character is revealed. Clara James didn't lead a protest. She didn't carry a sign or start a movement online. She simply served one man a warm plate of food. She offered him a seat in a moment of humanity when the world had turned away. And somehow that small gesture was powerful enough to shift the heart of an entire town. This story isn't just about a waitress or a veteran. It's about all of us, about the choices we make when no one is watching, about the kind of kindness that doesn't trend, the kind of compassion that costs something and asks for nothing. It asks, how many people have we overlooked at the grocery store, at the bus stop, at our own dinner tables? How often do we let fear or policy or pride drown out our better angels? In today's America, where loneliness stretches longer than freeways and common decency can feel like a dying language, Clara's story stands as a gentle, firm reminder. That honor doesn't always come with medals. Sometimes it's wrapped in wax paper, or served with a cup of coffee, or whispered in the stillness of an ordinary night. And maybe, just maybe, that kind of honor is what we need most right now.